My watch says 1, so I think I'll do the intro and then hopefully more people will roll in. But good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sage Safran. I'm the Sustainability Initiatives Coordinator for the National Dairy Farm Program at the National Milk Producers Federation. The Farm Program's Workforce Development Pillar is a voluntary initiative that supports dairies in human resources and safety management. We offer free farmer resources like HR templates, safety and HR manuals, and on-farm evaluations. We welcome you to come by our booth. It's in the exhibition hall right here. It's booth 4508 to learn more about our program. The National Dairy Farm Program has the honor of sponsoring this presentation on practical employee management strategies by Dr. Robert Hagevoort. As the dairy landscape continues to change with dairies growing larger, automation continuing to advance, and workforce regulations that change and vary from state to state, the demands for the dairy industry's workforce have never been higher. Now, more than ever, it's important to take steps to ensure your workforce is committed and motivated to do the best job possible. As an associate professor at New Mexico State University and an extension dairy specialist, Dr. Robert Hagevoort works closely on many emerging environmental and regulatory issues, as well as dairy workforce training and education. With decades of experience, Dr. Hagevoort's work ranges from on-farm procedural training on dairies to mid-level leadership development and evaluations. The farm program is excited to welcome Dr. Robert Hagevoort.
Thank you. Appreciate that introduction. Thank you very much. So I don't have a dairy. I work for a university. I don't milk cows. I've got 2 employees. So who am I to tell you about employee strategies, right? Maybe I should sit down and let some of you come up and tell me what you have learned, how to manage employees and do that the best you can, right? Because who am I, right? I work at a university. I'm one of those that tries to not live in an ivory tower, and I work out of Clovis, New Mexico, surrounded by dairies. I'm a nutritionist by trade. In private consulting, did that for about 15 years in Southern California. Last 15 years, I've worked for New Mexico State University, and in very similar roles. Whatever comes up with dairy on it, in it, or with it, I get sent out, or I go out and I help work with producers. I have an arrangement with the university that they cut my paycheck twice a month, and I still get to work with producers. I love it. I mean, and I can fly under the radar. So that's what I do. One of the things that as a nutritionist I ran into early on is I can prescribe a 100-pound, 120-pound pound ration and give that to a dairyman. But we're not getting 100 pounds of milk or 120 pounds of milk. Why not? The genetics are there. Feed quality is probably there. Something somewhere along the line went wrong, is not going the way we wanted, so that we get 100 pounds of milk. And a lot of times that problem has a first name and a last name. And I'm not trying to point fingers. But something along the line didn't go right. Either we didn't mix it right, we didn't train the person right. There's issues there with personnel that kind of create that situation where we may not get that kind of milk. And so I have, for the better part of my career, now almost going on 30 years, I've worked with employees all the time. I worked for the King Ranch down in Venezuela. I spent a long time living in Venezuela. I'm fluent in Spanish, so that's not an issue. I can communicate with workers. And I can get to the nitty-gritty about what's going on, trying to figure out what we need to do, can do, should do, and where the bottlenecks are at. And so, but in the last 15 years, working at New Mexico State, I've really gotten in depth into providing maybe more effective training that really is helpful. The other thing in the New Mexico Panhandle area, the Southwest, working with some of these large operations, producers were asking me, we need to have a safety program. We need to have something that we can train our employees on. We're turning them over so fast. We really need to start talking about large herd animals, animal handling, stockmanship, safety in general, chemical, electrical, all those different things. And there really was not something that we could use for that. So we developed that as well. As I said, I am a nutritionist. What do I know about people? I know about cows. I know what goes in the front end. I know what comes out of the rear end. And I estimate what happens in the middle, right? Try to explain that. So early on, I recognized that, and I was able to start working with Dr. David Dufresne. He's now a good friend of mine, who does understand a little bit more about the human part of that equation. He's got his doctorate in occupational health and safety. And so I've worked with him now a long time. He understands the human part. He doesn't get the cow part. So between him and I, we kind of team up and we kind of approach this and look at it, what is the human angle and what is the animal angle and where can we go with this? So that has worked really, really well. So just kind of to paint a picture a little bit, and I'm not telling anybody anything new, the U.S. dairy industry is changing rapidly. I mean, it is going faster and faster every time that I turn around. And what we're working with nowadays, especially in the big dairies in the West, this is not your daddy's dairy anymore. I mean, we're seeing increasing herd sizes everywhere. This is from Journal of Dairy Science a couple of years ago. But, I mean, these numbers are probably very much the same, but all across the globe, consolidation within the dairy industry is a reality. So what does that mean, consolidation? Well, dairies become larger, are larger, meaning in number of cows, right? Very rapid consolidation. Larger dairies employ more people, and on some work that we did, we found about one employee per 100 cows, and even that is changing fast. Employees are not just family labor anymore, they're now hired labor, right? I'm not telling anybody anything new, but I just want to kind of set the stage here. Employees are usually from a different cultural or linguistic background, right? They're foreign born, as we will say that. The other thing is that employment typically is not based on skills. It can be, but the majority of the starting workers is not. They don't show up with a resume. They show up with the willingness to perform a task, right? They want a job, and so we hire them. But it's not based on what they know. That may be at the higher level of the case, but in generally it's not. So we have very limited, or we really don't know what the education or the training is that that person has received. We really don't know. We're taking a huge gamble on the person. We got somebody that is willing to do the job for us, whatever that is on the dairy that we may need somebody. So that person may not be familiar at all working around large herding animals or large equipment for that matter, right? The car they drive may be the equipment that they know to operate, right? So we have an industry, quite frankly, going from where we were, say, 50 years ago to where we are today in transition, and that continues to change really, really fast. The other thing, and I'll get into this here in a minute, we virtually have no metrics pertaining to our workforce. And what do I mean with that? Well, if I take, for example, metrics for cows, we have a whole show out here that's based on metrics for cows. Right? I mean, from repro to feeding to the parlor, all the metrics that you even remotely wanted to measure, you can find equipment, you can find tools, gadgets to do that right here at this show, right? Related to nutrition, reproduction, parlor, health, calf. We can go on, and you can make lists with all these different things that we monitor on cows and that we measure on cows. Everything is expressed in a metric per pound of milk, per 100 pound, per whatever, right? All these different metrics. What about performance metrics for humans? Our workforce. Can we measure who is our best worker in a particular situation? What metrics do we have? There's one that I really know of, feeder deviation or feeder error in FeedWatch, in your FeedWatch software, because it's computerized. So you can actually measure how close that feeder is to what we want him to feed, right? That is a true measure of the accuracy of him or her putting that ration together. What about repro? Services per conception? Maybe. But the cow's got something to say in that too, right? It's not just the person. Maternity? DOA? Well, the cow's got something to do with that too, right? And the calf. That's not just the person, right? Milker metrics, if I've got 8 milkers in my parlor, how can I, besides observing and spending a lot of time in my parlor, figure out what is my best milker, or what, alternatively, what is my worst milker, so that I can improve that milker? How do I know that? There is no metrics that show to me on a piece of paper when I walk in the barn in the morning, this is how my milkers performed. You know, they're getting too busy, or they've got too much time, or there's too much stuff going on. I don't know how my milkers are doing, except for me maybe observing videotape. And as a consultant, I've done that for years. I've spent I don't know how many hours sitting in a parlor somewhere watching videotape to figure out what is going on, where we can improve things. Not necessarily to catch people in doing something that they're not supposed to, but really figuring out how is that team working. Where can we improve things? Economic metrics, rate of return per employee. Do we have something like that? Right? Nothing, right? We really don't have a whole lot. We got that cow part down. What about that human part? And this is an area where Dr. Dufresne and I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how can we come up with effective metrics that really help me understand what is happening with my employees on my place. So what does all of this mean for owners and managers? Well, owners and managers are now not cow managers anymore. They've become people managers, right? As soon as you start hiring more people, you quit being a cow manager and become a people manager. Sometimes I got to tell a dairyman that. Do you realize that you are no longer managing cows? You got people to do that. You need to stop spending time on your cows and let people take care of your cows that you hire to do that and get out of their way so that you can help them become better at what it is that they're doing, which is managing the people that manage the cows. Right? But most owners, managers, were raised to be cow managers. So if a middle manager tells me that he's struggling with managing people, that's not an indictment of that person. It's just a fact that they learned how to be good cow managers. They are very good with cows. Where in the world did they learn how to manage people? They went to school to learn about dairy and farm management. They learned tech skills. You come to a show like this and you learn more tech skills, right? Where do you learn the people skills? Where do managers today, except from experience, right, by doing it and getting better at it and making lots of mistakes in the process, where did they learn the soft skills? Is there a school somewhere for dairy management, HR? Classes? I know very few. Now you can go to there's some managers now that got a degree and got a business degree and did indeed get some HR classes and took a lot of management classes, right? So they picked up some of those soft skills in the process, but not particular to dairy. Very few. The other thing, and again, this is not an indictment, but if I were to do a personality test in a room full of producers that I talk to, I really would like to know how many come out as your typical CEO. The guy that is hiring, motivating, delegating, explaining, going, coaching all day long till they come home and they're still coaching. How many of us in agriculture are probably more the quiet kind of person that really wants to be out there with our tractor, with our cows, doing our technical stuff, whatever that is, and not deal with people because they're a pain in the you-know-what, right? We want to do that. And if it takes for us, and I'm one of those, if it takes for us any longer than 30 seconds to have to explain to somebody how to do it, guess what? We want to do it ourselves, right? So your personality type is not helping you. That's not an indictment. That's not a criticism. It's something to realize that your personality might not even be helping you either. Okay? It's just a realization. So if we look down the road, we are now predicting 1 employee per 200 cows. Some of these automation companies out here, if you talk to them, you ask them, they're now figuring with 1 employee per 250 or 300 cows. What that means is we're going to end up with fewer employees, more equipment and automation doing the job for us. But those employees, those few employees that we still have left, are going to need to be of a higher skill set. They also need to be able to maintain equipment and gadgets, technology besides the animals that they're taking care of. So we need a very high level of specialization at each position, as we already have that. We have to define what those tech skills are, and then to raise the question, and I'll ask that question, who is teaching and training these folks on these skill sets, except for on the dairy? But do we have a certification program for milkers, feeders, breeders, outside guys, health technicians, whatever we want to call them? Nope. But we need to. We really, really need to. For you all to be able to say, this guy showed up with this certificate, that means that he is a good breeder, at least he knows. Now, if he can breed for me, that's a different story, right? But at least I know he's got that level of skill to where he can breed, or where he can feed, or where he can treat my cows. We need a certification program for our workers. The other question is, with the rate we're going, manual versus automation, how much more are we going to do automated versus manually, right? I mean, here in no time to come, we'll be milking cows with robots versus manually, right? How many other processes on the dairy are going to be automated and robotic? The other thing that we need to understand is that we still talk, sometimes you hear this in conversation, the manual labor that's being conducted on a dairy is still sometimes referred to as low-skilled labor, especially in our political terms, in political jargon. Anything on the dairy is not low-skilled labor. There is not a position on the dairy that is low-skilled labor. It's all very technically advanced. Picking strawberries might be considered low-skilled labor, right? And I'm not trying to be denigrating strawberry pickers. That's the reality, right? You don't need much of a skill set to be able to pick strawberries. But you do need quite the skill set to be a maternity worker, right? You almost need to be a veterinarian to do that right, or at least part veterinarian. Being able to handle animals and move them correctly and get them from A to B without either harming the animals or yourself. That's a huge skill set. These are doctors in and by themselves, being able to recognize that a calf is sick and then being able to diagnose that and treat that animal according to the protocols and the standing operating procedures that we have. Same thing here. These are tremendous skill sets that every one of these people need to possess. Same thing here. This is not just something that comes by, you know, you walk on a dairy by 8 o'clock in the morning, by 9 o'clock in the morning you're an expert. This takes a lot of time, training, and effort to get these people to where we need them to do the best of their ability. And then I want to relate this, the skill set and the ability of workers, the level of knowledge that they have about large herding animals. How does that affect the outcome, their safety, but also the well-being of the animals, relating that to animal welfare? Because if they really don't understand how we need to deal with large herding animals, then the whole animal welfare issue becomes a question too. To what extent, if we improve the human skill set and we train and motivate and delegate them to a point where we know that they're doing their job at 100 or 110%, if we do that, how much will animal well-being or animal welfare improve? Is that a linear relationship? I know there is a relationship, right? Of course there's a relationship, because it depends on the human to do the job. We know that there is a relationship. I don't know if it's linear or not. It could be a whole different ballgame. It could be a different line. But animal welfare, we talk about that a lot. Let me switch gears here for a minute. So there's a lot of things that we don't know. Okay? There's a lot of things we don't know in the dairy. There's a lot of things that we don't understand when it comes to our employees. But what we do know is we've done a lot of dairy safety training over the years, last couple of years. And these are some numbers that we've come up with. So these are some dynamics that are happening in the workforce that I want to talk about and want to make you aware of. So we trained about 1,300 in this particular data set. This is a grant that we had, 1,300 employees. This is all over the US, primarily in the Southwest, but we were up in Washington State, we were up in New York, and so we've gone all across the country training people, okay? This is safety awareness training. Percentage male to female, the job positions right here, years of experience, and one question we asked them in the survey, what was their highest education level achieved? We did not ask them, what did you finish, but what did you start? Did you go to school at all? No. So that was 6.1%, did not go to school at all. Did you start elementary school? Yes. 28% said they started. Did you start middle school or the equivalent to middle school in the country where they're from? And another 25% said yes. So we got about 60% of our employees that we interviewed all across the dairy that have a 5th grade level education or below. Now I don't say this to be denigrating to those that are in that position, but that means that we have to develop education training at that level of education, right? That's what that means. So we got to understand that some of the folks that may have very limited education may not be able to read or write. Illiteracy is still a huge issue amongst the workforce. So if I give somebody an SOP that we utilize, they wouldn't be able to know, and they're going to tell you that they read it and understand it, but they don't, right? That's a huge issue. The other thing that we asked, where are you from? Now, if I had done this study maybe 10 years ago, I would have gotten a redundant 80 to 90% from Mexico. These numbers are changing, and they're changing fast, and this has implications. So there is now about 23% that come from Guatemala. Excuse me. Pushed the wrong button here. There's about 23% that comes from Guatemala, about 2.6% and another 2% from Honduras and Salvador. So we got now about 25% of our workforce coming from Central American countries. Very different from what it used to be, where we had 80 or 90% coming from Mexico. And you go like, okay, well, they're Hispanics, right? Nope. Because their native language, if we ask the question about what is your native language, it doesn't mean that they may not speak another language, but what is your native language? 65% said Spanish, 22% said Quiche. Who here has heard about Quiche? Okay. I'm starting to see more and more hands go up when I talk about and when I give this presentation. So those folks that come from Central America and are from Mayan descent, right, in those countries that are not Hispanic, they are from Mayan descent, right? If they did not go to school in the city and did not learn Spanish, they speak one of the 23 or 24 or 25, whatever, I've seen numbers all over the board, different Mayan languages. Quiche is the most predominant one spoken. That's what they speak amongst themselves. So one time I'm doing a training in Spanish safety training or animal handling training, I can't remember. I had about 20 or 30 guys sitting there, we're talking in Spanish. And I have a guy in the back of the room obviously translating or of some sort to another 8 guys that were sitting next to him. They were listening to him. And I go like, wait a minute, time out. So we stopped for a minute and I asked him, I said, is my Spanish that bad? And he goes like, no, your Spanish is great, but they don't speak Spanish. And I go like, huh? Where are they from? Guatemala? And they don't speak Spanish? No. So what do they speak? Well, that's where I got the explanation. So people that grow up in the countryside, in those countries, and don't go to school, don't learn Spanish. They speak one of the Mayan languages, of which Quiche is apparently the most predominant one. I didn't know that either. And those languages are actually not written languages in our alphabet. They're glyphic languages. So there is nothing written. They then obviously don't read and write. So here we are, translating all of our materials in Spanish and handing them out to our workers. Hey, we complied. We're giving them all the translated materials. We're talking to them in Spanish. We're training in Spanish. And guess what? We're not reaching that part are a large part of our workforce because they don't speak Spanish. I did not know this. And I've seen and talked to a lot of dairymen that did not know this either. So now, besides that, so we have now a large majority of these are our general findings, large majority of workers that are no longer coming from an ag background. Most of them in years past would come from a ranch, from a farm, or they at least had milked their grandma's cow. They knew what it was getting kicked by a cow, right? They at least knew what it was to work with a cow. Most of them not anymore. They have no or very limited experience working with large animals or equipment. Like I said, about 60% has a 5th grade level education or below. So there's a very high level of illiteracy or low reading comprehension level. That's even more important probably. Then we have very high labor turnover, especially in the first 6 to 12 months, right? So we got to do this constantly. We're constantly training and training again. We have now a shift in the typical workforce makeup to more Central Americans, which are of a different culture. Like I just said, it's an indigenous culture, it's a Mayan culture. That is not the Hispanic culture. Very, very different. And if I were to ask you, I'm Dutch, and if I were to ask you here, say, give me 3 characteristics of the Dutch. Well, I think that pretty much everybody talks about cheese and they're stubborn and loudmouths and whatever. I mean, I've heard all those, right? But if I were to ask you, give me 3 characteristics about the Mayan or indigenous Central American culture. Huge culture. We've all read about it, how big the Mayan culture was. Do we know any characteristics? What do they believe? What is their belief system? What is their family structure? How are their relationships, male, female, marriages? How do they live? Is that like we do in our typical society? I didn't know anything. I've learned a little bit more since by talking and reading. But if we have now another culture in our workforce, should we not at least know a little bit more about who is working for us? To be able to validate them and what they are and who they are? They, for one, do not like to be called Hispanic because they're not. Right? They have much more in common with our indigenous tribes here in the U.S., our indigenous people, than they have in common with the Europeans. We just throw them in this big bucket of Hispanics. I thought the same thing. I lived in Venezuela for a long time. I had never encountered this till a couple of years ago. Different languages that we now throw in the mix. The other thing, from an ergonomic perspective, and this is where Dr. Dufresne comes in as an ergonomist, so we have now our 6'1" Anglo, our 5'1" Hispanic, and guess what? Our 4'1" Central American worker. Again, that's nothing denigrating, that is a reality, that's a fact. So if I can reach a button in a parlor with my 6'1", guess where my 4'1" co-worker stands and has to do in order to reach that same button? Right? Or hanging machines. If I'm hanging machines, all these parlors are designed for about my height. I can hang them in my wheelhouse. I can work cows right where I'm at. So maybe I can work 8 or 10 hours without fatiguing. Maybe, not anymore. Maybe used to. What about our 4'1" friends? And I'm going to show you this. So now instead of dealing with 2 cultures and 2 languages that we knew of, we're dealing with 3 cultures, 3 languages, and 3 statures in our workforce. And a lot of us didn't even realize that. Look at this picture. So here's your typical Hispanic worker, and behind him there's another worker. Look at his height, follow the rail. Okay, he is working right in his wheelhouse, right? This guy, look at the arm over here. They're both standing on a mat. This is that very same guy that was in the back here. You could look at the angle of his arms. Now, unless he drinks a whole lot more Red Bull, He's probably going to fatigue much quicker than this guy, right? So if we're wondering about why it is that our guys are not completing the shift the way it should be, or that they're cutting corners, or why there's issues in the parlor, have we ever thought about this? Different stature? It's reality. What about a 4-1 guy breeding cows? Our tall Holstein, maybe Jerseys, but what about our tall Holsteins? That going to work? Prec checking them? That's an issue. So we started doing dairy safety training in 2011, 2012, and then we developed these DVDs that went all around the world, and there's actually a few folks here in the room that have used those DVDs extensively on their dairies to implement a dairy safety program. And so, and they're great. I mean, I've heard this from a lot of different people that they were good, okay? So we would do a lot of extension trainings, right? We get a lot of these workers in about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they get a cup of coffee or they get a milk or whatever. They sit down, and we talk for, 9, 10 in the morning. We talk for an hour or two. We do training, like what we do in extension, right? We do training. That's what we do. Well, these guys have already worked since 4, 5, 6 in the morning, and it was either cold or wet or hot, or maybe it was just a nice morning. Nevertheless, they come in at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Guess what? And Armando Garcia, who's my associate there at New Mexico State, he's a former professor from the University in Venezuela. He's working with me, doing a lot of these trainings with me. And he's good. He's really good. He's not boring. But after about 20 minutes, that room looks like this. It's reality, guys. I mean, 20 minutes talking, and I mean, you're maxed out, and you're going to go, I see some eyes already kind of going, it's just right after lunch. It's reality, right? So how effective are these trainings? So everybody was talking about we need more training tools. No, you don't need more training tools. What you need is more effective training tools. Something that you throw at the wall and actually sticks. Written SOPs are not learning tools, and how often do we not hand out an SOP, this is how we do business? And what if they can't read? They're procedural tools, making sure that everybody in this room working for the same outfit does it the same way, the same time, all the time, for every cow, be it Monday morning or Sunday morning. Right? Reading comprehension is an issue. Comprehension retention, even if they were to read it, do they really understand the technical aspects and retain that? We're all as adults, most of us are visual learners. So how good is a piece of paper for learning purposes? Paper instruction is so antiquated. We can do better. We can do more efficient and more effective. So what we did is we took these videos, put them on an iPad, kind of cut them up, put questions in between, and then we were able to give these guys a set of earbuds, put it on an iPad like this, and so we have 20 iPads in a big case, so we can train about 20 guys at the same time. They are now training individually. They're going through this with a set of earbuds in their eyes. So now the guys that can't read or have issues with understanding the questions, because they're not all spoken yet, they're not all audio yet, we can take them aside and take them on a one-on-one tour and explain to them what it is that we're trying to explain. Takes about an hour and a half for safety training, individual and interactive, because they have to go through questions. And it may be simple, but it retains their attention with the material. Workers receive a certificate and owners receive a training report, much like this, that these workers were trained on those topics on that day. So you can put that in your OSHA file, that if there's ever a question on it, that you can say, yes, this particular worker was trained on that day by so-and-so on these topics. Don't underestimate the power of recognition. This was up in Washington. We were doing training there, and this young man came walking through that door about an hour and a half before with a face that looked like war. I mean, he did not want to be there. He was one of those that had issues with reading and writing. And he had done training after training after training, and everybody had come in there with training. and given them something to read and understand. And he was frustrated with trainings. He couldn't stand it anymore. Another training. He had worked there for about 25 years. Why would he need to be trained? It was all on a piece of paper and he could never read it. So he actually went through the video like I just showed you. We took him aside one-on-one to kind of explain what I just showed you in the other picture on a one-on-one session, and took him through this. And then we gave him a certificate of training and said, congratulations, you passed this training. Well done. When was the first time that he received in his life a certificate recognizing him for something that he did well? Or the last time, I should say. Probably never, right? Didn't go to school. We got file folders full with all these diplomas and certificates of participation, right? We got tons of those things. We don't even pay attention to that anymore. These guys, we've trained in Washington, guys that used to work in New Mexico, and guess what? They got that certificate hanging in their bedroom or above the dining table. They would come in and say, look, I framed it. It's hanging on above my dining table. That's what this means to them. An hour and a half of training. That's what that means to them. Do not underestimate the power of recognition on a job well done. Usually they get told when they do it wrong, right? This was well done. Then we go through and do effectiveness evaluation, and we ask them, did you like the training? Was it simple, this and that? We want to know if they actually learned something, right? So there's a Kirkpatrick model of evaluation, and I won't take you through all the details and all the numbers. But that's what we do in order to evaluate if that training was effective or not. And I skipped a few slides here. And so we know that we actually are making a difference. That's the point I'm trying to make. All right, so now we did the same thing with safe animal handling or the stockmanship training that we developed for the farm program. That is actually the quality assurance, beef quality assurance program. That's actually the farm program that you see online now, the stockmanship program that's on the farm website. We did the same thing. We put it on these iPads. And then actually we took it one step further, because try to explain to a worker that doesn't know stockmanship point of balance. You can try to explain it even in a video, but they don't understand it until you get out in the pen and show it. Point of balance. What the heck is a point of balance? Right? So we get out in the pen so we can talk about these concepts like flight zone. Flight zone. Flight zone maybe you can explain, right? It has some natural things to it. You can do that. Point of balance, herding instinct. So we get out in the pen and we actually work with these guys and say, okay, that white cow right there, I want that white cow in a pen by herself because I need to treat her. How would you go about doing that? And you can't use more than 2 people. I don't want you out there, all 8 or 20 of you chasing these cows. I want 2 guys to get that white cow out there, separate it, put it in this pen over here. How do we do this? Using herding instinct, using cow ability, right? That's what we tend to. So then that's the next thing, taking it out to the outside and actually doing it. So here are some observations. A large majority, again, have no experience in working with large animals or equipment. Many employees know very little about the senses, how cows see, how they hear, how they smell. Very, very few people know anything about how cows actually tick. Many employees have wrong perceptions about how to act around animals. Just look at how many people are yelling and screaming and hitting on fences and doing all kind of crazy shit behind these cows that is totally against the cow's senses. They've learned it from other pushers or from other people around them, but it's totally wrong, right? So we talk about those things. Even seasoned workers who maybe know what to do, right? The School of Hard Knocks. They may not know why they're doing it. Experienced workers appreciate the validation of those skills. I've seen that many, many times. Owners and managers can make great impact by reinforcing how important animal handling skills are to them. We always ask the managers of the operations to be there and to reinforce how important that is to them. Many owners and managers take this awareness training to build on and practice concepts with workers so they can continue doing that. They can use the videos, they can use these concepts and continue working with workers. What does this mean for animal welfare? Animal handling is much more an art than it is a task. And you're going to have to learn that and practice it. It takes two to tango. Correct animal handling starts the day the animal is born, continues for a lifetime. Animal handling skills are learned slowly by observing and practicing over and over again. The best thing you can tell somebody is sit on this bale of hay or on this fence and watch and learn. And then come out with me and do it. It's something that takes a lot of time. Given that animal handling is a skill set, the question needs to be asked, what human personality traits does a cow handler need to possess? And I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of employees that I see handling cows that shouldn't be anywhere around cows. Maybe on the tractor, maybe in the machine shop, but not around cows. They don't have the patience and they don't get it. Okay? Get rid of them. Not in that position. It's going to create issues. It answered the question also, did we select the right people for the job? Well, I know in this job market we don't have much of an opportunity to really select, right? You pick the warm body that walks on. This is my personal experience. Dairies where handlers understand why they are doing what they are doing, cows are typically calmer, more curious, and less fearful of humans and human interactions. It's what we're seeing on robot dairies right now, right? Less human interaction and cows are calmer, more cow-like. Cows can be cows. Animal well-being benefits as we teach and train employees on the skills and the knowledge. And then this is the big part on strategy. We focus on coaching attitudes. You don't train attitudes, you coach attitudes. That is why certain teams go to the Super Bowl and continuously go to the Super Bowl, because they have maybe the same skills and knowledge than some of the other teams, but they have the attitude of a winner, the attitude of excellence. And that starts at the top. That doesn't come from them. That's leadership. Motivation, confidence, integrity, honesty, enthusiasm, and commitment. A lot of times when we talk about animal welfare and animal well-being, we kind of talk about it as a concept. We're going to do this, right? We're part of the farm program. Our co-op wants us to do this thing. We're going to do animal welfare. We're going to do the right thing. Like it was an abstract concept. I'm here to tell you it's not an abstract concept. It's an outcome. That animal does not live in by itself. It does not take care of itself. It needs to be fed. It needs to be managed. It needs to be milked. It needs to be done. All these things that we do. Animal welfare is an outcome. It's the positive outcome of an interaction between a human and an animal. It is what we achieve with these animals by understanding correctly what those animals are all about. I can take that animal out there and put human in there and the same thing holds true. Human well-being around these 1,500-pound animals that can kill us with one good placed kick also depends on this outcome, a positive outcome. It's a give and take. It takes two to tango. Employees typically mean well. But if you cannot anticipate what a 1,500-pound animal is going to do and you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's where we end up with accidents. And there's too many stories out there. It's very easy to get frustrated for workers if they don't know what to expect. And frustration is the perfect setup for the wrong outcome. And I think this frustration is part of why we're seeing some of those abuse videos where workers are tempted to be coached into these abuse videos because they're frustrated. They're frustrated working on that place. They're frustrated working with cows. They don't mind kicking that cow or doing whatever it is that they're required to do on that video. They're frustrated. And that stems from not knowing what cows are all about. Human well-being concerns increase with the lack of understanding of what a 1,500-pound animal can do. We talked about that. The other thing is cows, we got to remember that. Cows have great memories. They recognize people well, and they know who treats them well or not. We always think about it from our perspective. But that cow knows darn well that this pusher is a nice pusher, and that pusher is not such a nice pusher. And you can look at the cows, how they respond to certain people, to learn the difference. You can observe that. You can see it. Learned behavior on the animal part is an important component of the human-animal interaction equation. What they learned from calf on and where they are today, that learned behavior is extremely important, how they're going to react to anything that we put pressure on those animals, that experience. So, going back to these strategies, and I'll wrap it up here. What are these practical employee strategies? Well, we've already talked about some of the challenges that we're facing. Labor, that's for everybody in the dairy industry, but everybody in business. All businesses that employ more than yourself and you got one employee, labor is the major challenge. Don't feel alone in this. Labor is an issue everywhere, okay? Managing people is far more difficult than managing cows. Realize it, accept it. It's really easy to manage cows. Managing people is the difficult part. That's your challenge. Most owners and managers are at a total disadvantage because they're great cow managers. Like I said, where did they learn how to become people managers? It's at no fault of yours that this is a challenge, but it is. Any other business faces the same thing. Like I said, even your personality might not be helpful to become a good manager or a good CEO or a good coach. Your personality may not be helping you there. And then, like I said, the recent changes in our labor workforce put all these labor challenges on steroids. Give it an extra dimension. And then to boot, we're probably now dealing with a generation which doesn't like to or want to, whatever that word may be, and we can talk about that, like to or want to do physical challenging work or work more than so many hours. We are dealing with a different generation that we did in the past. It's a reality. Okay, so those are the challenges. Now, where are the strategies? Come up with your answers, Hagevoort. How are we going to do this? Well, what I see, this is not what I've done, but what I see successful operators do in response to those challenges. First of all, they know their metrics, the cow metrics. They got all the numbers down. Okay? They know that in and out, so that they can make informed management decisions. If you don't have your numbers straight, how can you manage people to tell them where they should make certain decisions? You got to have that down first. Then you got to get out of your comfort zone and purposely focus on leading people. And that means getting out of your comfort zone. That has nothing to do with cows now anymore. Now we're dealing with people, that part that you just dislike. You want to go in the house, you want to do paperwork, you want to do whatever. But this is the part where successful dairy operators succeed. They take that on. They work with these employees. If it's not in your personality and it goes against your grain, don't try. Hire somebody that is good at it. There's lots of people in other industries that are very good HR managers. They may not know nothing about cows, but they can learn the cow part. But they got the people part down. If you're not good at it, get somebody that is. Not that difficult, right? Get to understand your audience. If you're speaking, like I do a lot, first of all, you got to understand your audience, right? As dairy owners and managers, do we really know what our audience is? Do we really know who our workers are? If we may not even know what their cultures are, what their cultures stand for, how can I validate one of my workers if I don't even know what is valuable to him or her? If I have never spent a minute thinking about what cultures are working on my dairy, what language do I hear, what are the interactions between, say, the Hispanics and the indigenous, the Mayan culture? Now, you may not learn a lot because a lot of that stuff is under the surface. But if I don't spend any time trying to learn who is really working for me, how can I ask them to give the 100%? They just get the paycheck. They could care less. Those cows are not their cows. They go home and they do what they do with the money. In order to get 100% from your workforce, you have to invest in getting to know who they are and who really works for you. Validate them at their point of being a human being. Get to understand what would make workers more successful in their jobs. Right, one? Get to talk to them, try to communicate, get to understand from your managers what would make them more successful. It doesn't mean that you have to give everything that they want, but have a rational conversation about what you think would make them more successful and what it is that they do. Is that training? Is that validation? Is that just telling them, a job well done? Hey, that was great. Because I know we'll tell them when it's not done right. Right? Tell them when they did it right. What would make them more successful in their jobs? This is one thing that always comes to the top when we talk to these workers and the middle managers. Be a clear communicator of expectations. How can you do a job 100% if you do not know what is expected? Yes, we have cultural barriers and we have linguistic barriers. So communication is tough. Find somebody that can communicate. Find a way to communicate. Hire somebody that is good at communicating. Whatever means you want to use for that. I mean, there's dairies that have TVs and systems in their parlor showing the metrics, showing the communication. I don't care, in the break rooms, with all of the messaging that they want to get to the workers, and it just plays over and over and over again in their language. Maybe it's videos. Maybe it's personal. Maybe it's communication. Maybe every Monday morning that's how you start off. I don't know. Whatever means works for you. If you're not a good personal communicator, find another way to communicate. There's other ways to communicate than in person. But communicate about the expectation. What is expected of that worker in that particular position? And have conversations about that. Do job evaluations. Keep talking about that. Now we're getting in the right direction. This is what we need to do. This is how we need to do it. I think one of the key things really is, what it really boils down to, is that you have to demonstrate leadership and excellence at the top. None of your workers are probably going to, with maybe an exception here or there, but none of your workers are going to be as good as you demonstrate to be. It starts at the top and it trickles down. You cannot compromise on any of that. You are the leader, you set the bar. Set it high. Last but not least, don't forget to be human for the human that work on your dairies. It is a business relationship, and we as Americans in our culture are very business oriented. We oftentimes forget the human component. For them to interact among themselves, for us to interact with them, we're humans first and foremost. I think that this is really critical, and I hear that from a lot. Even today we've had some conversations that were along those lines. The farm program has a ton of resources that you may have seen. This is just a shot from their website, their worker safety and human resources. The safety manual is right on there. The dairy stockmanship training that, like I said, that we helped them develop. The safety manual that Dr. Dufresne and I helped write for the farm program are on there. These are some of the resources that are available on our New Mexico State University Dairy Extension website. This is the last one that we're currently working, or the most current one that we're working on, cull cow care. Where to make those decisions about sending cows or not, or putting them down. And empowering people to make the right decisions. We're actually doing this with a farm program with Elanco and CSU. We're currently working on that. But those are all available right there on the website. And with that, I'll wrap it up and see if there's any questions that I can answer.
The U.S. recently took in tens of thousands of Afghan refugees. Wisconsin, here we have 13,000 eventually going to become through our culture somewhere. How do you, even as a dairy farmer, say, well, I need employees bad, maybe I'm going to reach out to these.
Right.
Where do you start in that kind of situation?
If you're looking to, you know, and a lot of our dairy farmers are short workers and would love to have more workers that would at least have a basic understanding of agriculture, right? But what it also does, it brings in another culture, another language, and another set of issues to combine what you already have. So it's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. Those dairies that deal well with these challenges and succeed in the HR portion, I wouldn't shy away from it. We've seen that not just with Afghan refugees, but refugees in general, right? The International Refugee Center translated at one point in time our training videos to send out to refugees from whatever country that were coming in, and we're working on dairies, and that works good. But you don't go to a dairy with those folks where HR development is an issue, because both will fail. It will be a failure all around if you cannot support that development of that workforce. Because even for those Afghans coming in our operations, that's a totally different world. They've never seen something like that, right? That would be my response. Any other questions? So I don't know if I gave you a lot of strategies. I hope I gave you something to think about when it comes to the workforce. These are observations that I've made. And I really believe that from here on going forward, the operations that handle that HR part well are going to be the ones that are going to be successful. The margins are too thin for anything else. You cannot leave that on the table anymore. Okay? Thank you for coming. Appreciate you coming, and have a great afternoon.